The problem we have with security is that we've been going through this process. We've been going through this process for several decades now. And it starts in academia, where somebody or some group of people do some interesting research and come up with some new defensive mechanism. Great, we come up with these new defenses now and then. And it's a really good defense, so using it becomes a best practice. It then gets inscribed on auditors' checklists. I mean inscribed, hand calligraphy or carved into stone or something, because once it is inscribed, it doesn't go away. Even when changes in technology or changes in the threat model make this new defense pretty useless. It stays on the checklists. I am sure that if we looked hard enough, we would find checklists that require you to shred old punch cards and paper tapes. And, once upon a time, that was an important defense, I'm sure. Though once when I was in grad school, we had a problem with our archives of boxes of punch cards. Punch cards, paper, wood fiber, delicious to termites and carpenter ants. We had this real debugging problem once with our library. Technology changes. I've been in this business almost 50 years, which in itself is a scary concept. Starting from single job batch systems where there wasn't a real operating system. You loaded fresh from mag tape or disk or paper tape for each job. There's no hardware separation between the kernel, if there was such a thing, and user space, because there was no such thing. Moved on from there to multi-user time-sharing systems, whether it was a mainframe or a Unix system or a so-called super mini like a VAX. And then, technology doesn't go in straight lines. It kind of loops back on itself. Microcomputers. Microcomputers reinvented the square wheel of unprotected systems, no kernel mode and so on. DOS with no OS protection. Dial-up, PCs with dial-up modems to connect to things. Then network PCs running full-blown operating systems. You can quarrel about whether or not Windows 95 or 98 qualify, but Windows XP certainly did. Now we've got smartphones and tablets, the ancestors of those. Remember Palm Pilots? Single-user computer, no hardware memory protection, and so on. Back to where we were with the single-job batch system. Moved on to the so-called Internet of Things, whatever that is. We're repeating the same thing, a lot of the same mistakes, but technology changes. The problem is our checklists don't really change to match. A somewhat more subtle change is that the threat model changes. When I started in the security business, and I caught my first hackers around 1971, one I hired, the other I sent to the dean. It was a different time and place, but the one I sent to the dean was doing things that even in 1971 he should have known better. So-called joy hackers, the pursuit of knowledge. Maybe somebody else's knowledge, but they're interested in the pursuit of knowledge. It was manual hacking with a very few tools, often via stepping stones to cover your tracks. Maybe a dial-up stepping stone, that being the technology of the time. There were viruses and worms. We've had them with us for more than 30 years, but they were mostly nuisances. Didn't really do much except exist. And they spread randomly, and most of them did very little damage. The ones that did had no greater significance than juvenile delinquents walking down the street, slashing tires and snapping off car antennas. About 10 years ago, that changed when the spammers and the hackers made an alliance. The spammers started paying the hackers to hack machines, and virtually all the spam you get today is from penetrated machines. We moved well past the era of open SMTP relays. It's just hacked machines sending out this stuff. Have you noticed that we don't get any worms anymore that shut down the internet? You know why? It's bad for business. People who walk into stores or banks with a gun and stick them up don't really want the stores or banks to be closed. Then they can't rob somebody. So they don't write worms that shut down the internet anymore because they can't profit by sending spam, by sending phishing messages, by launching keystroke loggers, and so on. Instead, These worms have bots as their payloads. A friend of mine says these bots are sometimes called boats because they can carry any kind of payload whatsoever. And they're upgradable. These guys have gotten really good at dynamically updated software, so they can change what the stuff does. And of course, we moved on to nation states with cyber espionage and cyber attacks like Stuxnet and Flame and Shamoon. And a concept that's known around Washington as, quote, preparing the battlefield, unquote, which means you hack into your possible enemies' machines, and you certainly will learn what you can, but you leave a back door so that if there's a conflict, you don't have to hack into the machines then. It's already there waiting for you. It's interesting to look at this historically. A few months ago, I was reading a historical paper and talked about Britain's perception of who its enemies were in 1898. And they thought if there was another war, the three most likely enemies of Britain in 1898 were the United States, Japan, and Russia. 15 years later, of course, they had changed their mind about who their likely enemies were, but all those three countries became their allies instead. But it's interesting to think what would have happened if they had prepared the battlefield then. But what about our security advice? You open any checklist, any advice, website, what have you, on security, you'll find pick strong passwords, use a firewall, run current antivirus software, accent on current, pay for it every year, thank you, and stay up to date on patches. Every one of these sounds reasonable, but things have changed. Strong passwords, and I'll revisit each of these points in more detail. The Morris-Thompson paper, which is the one that which teaches us to use strong passwords, dates from 1979. Electromechanical terminals and a power user would have logins on 3 computers. A firewall. This laptop, this phone, move around. What firewall? Run current antivirus software, but it's increasingly ineffective, especially against high-end threats. And stay up to date on patches, but there are 0 days. And the more serious the enemy, the more likely they are to use 0 days. Stuxnet used 4 0 days in one attack. For those of you who don't recognize that thing on the right, that's an electromechanical teletype. The I/O device that Unix was written for, that's actually a Model 33. I think Unix was written for a Model 37, but it could run on 33s and 35s. No, that's an uppercase only device. I'm sorry? Yeah, 1 horsepower modem. Some of these things actually would have a little rotary dial on the right-hand side, and the paper tape reader on the left there. Our rationale for password strength comes from days when this was state of the art. These things have no local computational capability. This thing could have been built, and more or less was built, about 1915. The technology of this is 1915 technology. You can't really plant a keystroke logger or malware on a device like this. I mean, what's it going to do? Punch out my password onto a paper tape and hypnotize me into mailing it to somebody? And don't forget Moore's Law. If I want to go a straight line Moore's Law extrapolation since 1978, we have about a 4 million-fold improvement in price performance. This applies to password cracking too. So the old scenario, the hacker is stealing the system password file, hash passwords to be sure, per Morris and Thompson, from a time-sharing machine that has many users. The new scenario, the hacker is stealing an application password file, not the system password file, but the web login, the mail server login, what have you, from a machine that may have complex of machines that may have tens of millions of users or more. Facebook's got 1 billion users. Their password file hasn't been stolen to my knowledge, but RockU had 33 million entries in their password file when that one was stolen, so tens of millions at a minimum. It may be plain text, not hashed. Why? Because people forget their passwords. It's not your work password that you're using every day when you log in, and if you can't, you walk into the system administrator's office with your Bell Labs badge and say, please change my password for me. Instead, you click here for I forgot my password, and some of these systems will mail it to you in plain text. What good is a strong password when it's going to be mailed to you in plain text and stolen from your mailbox or the sending site's mailbox or just from the stolen non-hashed password file? Even places that hash the password and reset it, how do they recover? Secondary authentication questions. These are jokes. What is your mother's maiden name? I don't know how old that question is, but I have evidence that it's been used as an authenticator for financial transactions since 1882. A lot of the other stuff you can look up online. Lots of states, by the way, are putting their vital records online. Some guys a few years ago went to Texas. Texas has been very good about putting vital records online. Marriage records, birth certificates. Okay, A marries B. Here's the birth certificate. What is this person's mother's maiden name? You just backward walk through the tree. They had a remarkable success rate, too. Malware is planting keystroke loggers, and users are falling for these phishing websites. Somebody's got to be falling for it. I wouldn't keep getting so many emails about them. What good does a strong password do when you're dealing with this kind of threat model? How about firewalls? They're topological barriers. We all know that. The drawbridge over the moat or the customs barrier, whatever. Old metaphor. They work best if the firewalls themselves are small, otherwise they'll be just as buggy as the hosts, and they enforce a simple, comprehensible security policy. Some years ago, I asked one of the head security people at a large company, how many authorized connections do you have through your firewall? He thought for a moment and said, about 500. Okay, I won't ever quote your name with this, but how many unauthorized connections do you think you have in this company? Ones that you've never gone through and officially been vetted. He thought for a moment and said, probably another 500. This was years ago. The numbers are probably larger today. Customers, suppliers, joint venture partners, what have you. You're outsourcing stuff. Hundreds of connections through a firewall in a large company. And mobile computing. Here's something that Bill Cheswick and I wrote in our Firewalls book in 1994, when we started wondering about the future of mobile devices. I think this is the single most accurate prediction we made in that book. A fair amount of stuff didn't stand up, but I think this one stood up pretty well. How do you protect a mobile device when it has to interact with its local environment, if nothing else, so you can go click through the idiot web server intercept that all too many places insist on giving you, even when they're just going to not charge you for anything? How do you protect it? What firewalls? How about antivirus software? Here's a quote from the New York Times less than 6 months ago. The antivirus industry has a dirty little secret. Its products are often not very good at stopping viruses. Why not? Because it's matching viruses against a database of known ones. If the virus is too new, it hasn't made it into the databases yet. If the virus is not very widespread, like it's a tailored virus aimed at you specifically, it's not going to be in these databases. Stuxnet. Stuxnet was in Kaspersky's database of viruses. Not in their dictionary that's used to assess it, but in the corporation's research lab database. Here's a virus we should get around to analyzing one day. They couldn't keep up. There are too many of these little viruses out there. So it was never analyzed. If you don't like Iranian nuclear centrifuge, you might say, good, but it was detected and was never analyzed, never added to the database in any commercial antivirus program. Stuff can spread pretty widely before databases get updated. And again, a tailored one may not make it in at all. So what good is this up-to-date antivirus software? How about patches? We have to have patches. Software is buggy. Most security problems are due to buggy code. So we have to have patches. You have to install them. But it takes a long time to produce a high-quality patch. Too often, when you find an organization releasing patches instantly, they have patched not the underlying vulnerability, but one particular path to it. It takes a remarkably little effort for a clever attacker to find another path to the same vulnerability. Or the patch itself may be buggy. The patch itself may be so buggy that if you install it too quickly, it's going to brick your machine. That happened with, I think, last month's Microsoft Patch Tuesday. If you were running Kaspersky antivirus and installed one of Microsoft's security patches, your machine wasn't going to boot. And Microsoft does a really good job of testing their patches for compatibility and correctness and so on. It may kill your applications. That's happened too. You can't install the patches right away if you're running a production shop, but you have to, because Patch Tuesday is followed by Exploit Wednesday. The bad guys reverse engineer the patches and see what the hole was, and they start exploiting this hole they didn't know about until Microsoft or Apple or whomever released the fix. It's even easier, of course, with the open source systems where they just go run diff on the tree and look at the commit logs. So where did we go wrong in the security industry here? The advice we are given is static. Those 4 points about firewalls and patches and passwords and antivirus. It's static advice to use static defenses. But our adversaries are dynamic and adaptive, and the technology is changing extremely rapidly. Heinlein said it very well in 1941. Life's a dynamic process and can't be made static. And they all lived happily after is fairy tale. Well, the protagonist sentence got interrupted, but so what do we do? One thing we cannot do is predict important new applications. It's a decent bet that many of them will come from a 15-mile circle around this hotel, given where we are. But, we don't know what's coming next. Think of, the iPhone is, 6 years old? Less? Facebook and Twitter are not very much older? Every one of these things has changed the way we do business. There are more coming. I don't know if it's going to come out next week or next year, but I do know it's coming. Coming here from the airport, I paid the cabbie with a credit card, and he had a little widget plugged into his iPhone, a square, and he emailed me the receipt. Couldn't have done that 2 years ago. We can't predict radically new devices like smartphones. We cannot predict new classes of attacks. One thing we can do is make decent projections of improvement in CPU power, storage capacity, and price. We've got enough of a curve, and it takes long enough to get this stuff out of the pipeline into people's hands. We can have decent projections on this. Is that enough? Sometimes raw power is the threat, if you do it correctly. Let's take DES, the Data Encryption Standard, standardized in 1976, based on work done 2 years earlier, and then sent into the NSA to be improved. It has been known since 1979 that DES seemed to be susceptible to a brute force attack if you had enough computing power. You could argue about how much was enough in terms of dollars. Diffie and Hellman forecast $20 million in 1979. If we extrapolate from there, straight line by Moore's law, in 1997 it would have been about $5,000. In 1997, DES was cracked by a project spearheaded by John Gilmore and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It cost about $250,000. It's not a bad guess. We always knew it could be done. The The only question was exactly how much it was going to cost. But we can't predict a cryptanalytic breakthrough. The real underlying issue is that too many of our security mechanisms are based on assumptions, implicit assumptions, and these are not recognized as assumptions even by the architect of the security mechanism. When our hardware changes, when our software changes, when our usage patterns change, our assumptions can become invalid. But we never write these assumptions down, so we don't know to look for danger, and we don't know when we need to change the security advice, except incrementally several years too late. Let's look at passwords again. What were the assumptions? How much computing power did an attacker have? Well, a PDP 1170, that being the machine that the password hashing algorithm in 6th edition Unix was designed for in 1979. A more critical assumption is, what is the ratio of attacker to defender CPU power? How much CPU power can an attacker bring? There's some thoughts actually in the Morris Thompson paper about custom hardware, custom DES chips, but mostly it was computers. So they engineered a solution to take about a second to hash a password on a PDP 1170. And the threat model was someone was going to steal this hashed password file, and you couldn't do very much in the way of online guessing. Why couldn't you do online guessing? There were no networks. If you wanted to log into a computer system, you had to dial up with a dial-up modem. A big system might have 24 modems. No matter how hard you tried, you weren't going to be able to get more than 24 simultaneous attempts. At password guessing, it was still going to take a second per guess. So your rate of guessing, even independent of any explicit defenses, was seriously limited by the hardware available, by the fact that there are only, at most, 24 ports, and probably a lot less free ports. Another implicit assumption. People didn't have to remember very many passwords. A power user might have 3 or 4 passwords for 3 or 4 different clusters of machines. Most people had one. And finally, they assumed that an iterated cryptographic function cannot be inverted. That assumption, I'm happy to say, is held up. None of the others have. So when do they fail? Attacker computing power has been increasing gradually, certainly by Moore's law. But starting around 2000, the attackers started building large botnets. Suddenly, they had tens or hundreds of thousands of machines to do their computation. This has dramatically changed the ratio of attacker power to defender power. If I am trying to take a second to hash a user's password when they're trying to log in, and I'm dealing with 1,000 logins per second on a large web cluster that's not an unreasonable number, well, that means I need 1,000 CPU seconds for every second, real-time second. This is not a scalable result for the defender. But the attacker? Roll out another botnet, Joe. Got another password file to crack. More recently, it's been realized that GPUs, which are great for realistic video games, get really realistic splatters of blood coming out in some of the first-person shooters. Every core in the GPU is powerful enough to do password hashing. And the GPUs have a lot of cores. So you're getting hundreds of cores on hundreds of thousands of machines if you're the attacker. So the ratio has changed dramatically. And of course, the number of logins has been going up. I don't know about you, but I know I have more than 100 web logins. This is by actual count. I use a password manager because I can't remember 100 strong passwords, thank you. So I can count how many I have. It's more than 100. Our password policy remained the same. Strong passwords must not write them down any place. Thank you. I'm going to remember 100 strong passwords, each of which has slightly different rules, by the way. The rules often don't make sense quantitatively, but that's a separate issue. And I have to go change them every 30 to 60 to 90 days, depending on the device. And I'm having so much fun at the FTC, where I have my login password, my BlackBerry password, my Oracle database password, I have my travel reservation website password. And they all have different rules for what's acceptable. Our password policies have remained the same despite this drastic change in technology and the threat model. I keep talking about the threat model. Why is it important? Why, especially, is it an assumption? We're implicitly assuming certain limits to the behavior of our enemies. Even in the days of electromechanical teletypes, in theory, somebody could break into my house and hook a little recording mechanism up to my keyboard to record my keystrokes. Thank you. I have never done national security work at home from an electromechanical terminal, and I'm worried about somebody breaking into my house and doing that to my home terminal. And I've had a terminal in my house since about 1976. I'm sorry, 78. Not in my threat model. If I'm dealing with national security questions, maybe I do have to worry about that. Have you been following the news about l'affaire Snowden? Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who's been releasing a lot of this stuff, stated in an interview that he had a phone call to his partner back in Brazil where he discussed some of these files. And 2 days later, his partner's house was broken into and his laptop was stolen. Now, I don't know that it was an intelligence agency that did it, and if so, what country's intelligence agency it was. But, that's got to be in the guy's threat model. Those are national security secrets. Bob Morris the Elder, from whom I learned an awful lot about security, speaks about the 3 Bs: burglary, bribery, and blackmail, as very important computer security techniques and computer penetration techniques, at least if you're a nation state. Though I have heard stories of the mob, as in the mob, making people an offer they couldn't refuse for certain kinds of things. Alan Schiffman said it very well, to riff on a quote from Napoleon: amateurs worry about algorithms, pros worry about economics. How the threat model really means what resources will an attacker expend to break into your system. I drew it as this matrix here, 2x2 matrix, where one axis, the x-axis, is the degree of focus. How much is the attacker trying to get you? Person who wants to just send spam through a botnet doesn't really care whose machine is penetrated. They just want enough machines. Mine is fine, but so is yours instead of mine, or both, or neither will go on to someone else. That's one axis. The other axis is how skillful they are. Is it the teenager down the street just starting out with click here to infect a system? Or is it somebody in a deep, dark room in Beijing or Fort Meade or Tel Aviv or Moscow or Tehran or what have you? Different classes of attackers have different resources. The joy hackers, that lower left quadrant, they're primarily using downloaded scripts and canned exploits. This is the 1990s threat model for the most part, when there were a few very good, but most were not. The people aiming you, I call them targeteers, which actually is a word I formed my analogy with bombardier. The meaning of the OED is not quite the way I'm using it, but neither is target per the OED. So the shield that you use to defend yourself, that's actually originally called the target. A targeteer is someone who made one of these things. A targeteer is someone who's really aiming at you, but might not be very skillful, has considerable knowledge about your systems and procedures, possibly inside access. This might be your disgruntled employee or disgruntled ex-employee. They may be very good technically, they may be very bad technically, but they know an awful lot about what you do, and they can sound convincing if they want to social engineer their way in. The opportunistic attackers may be very good, but they don't care who they get. They'll have sophisticated tools and plenty of money, but one system is as good as another. I think Anonymous largely falls in that category. They go after Stratfor? Well, that's great. Were they trying to get Stratfor, or were they trying to get a big contractor in that space and advertised and bragged about the one where they succeeded? I don't know. And then the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. This is the nation state, or the really good attackers who aren't quite at the nation state level. But this is the really serious one. Lots of resources, highly skilled people. So now let's look at our defenses, the 4 defenses I outlined earlier, and look at the implicit assumptions and whether or not they've held up. So the most obvious assumption behind firewalls is their topological nature, and that has been described in the literature for 20 years and more. A less obvious assumption, though still you can find it in places, is that the firewall itself is simple, therefore likely to be correct, and the security policy is simple and therefore likely to be correct. A much less obvious assumption is that all interesting protocols can be protected efficiently by the firewall. This doesn't get mentioned a whole lot. When Bill Cheswick and I wrote our Firewalls book in '94, the very first book on the subject, there were maybe a dozen interesting protocols. I guarantee your laptop today is using considerably more protocols than that in the course of any ordinary day's work, most of which you don't see because they're all hidden under the hood. But the very crucial assumption is that the firewall itself is correct, and its implementation of the protocol is correct. Bill and I stated this as a justification for firewalls, but we took it as a given that the firewall would be that simple. We said firewalls are better because they're simpler and more correct. We didn't turn it around and say, what would happen if it's not true? We'd have probably run in terror, not written the book. All of these are now false. There are hundreds of protocols that have to be understood by any firewall. To function, it's got to understand all these protocols because it can't pass things through properly without understanding them. This means that there's an awful lot of code running on the firewall, probably a lot of very complex code, probably more code than is on any single computer, because it's supporting Linux, it's supporting Windows, it's supporting 17 versions of Windows, it's supporting Mac OS, it's supporting tablets, it's supporting this, it's supporting that. It's probably got more protocol implementation goo than your typical user machine. Why do we think this code is correct? Why do you think there's any hope of it being correct? We match it against the threat model. Firewalls will probably stop the joy hackers. That's about what they were built for in 1994. Opportunistic hackers will sometimes get through, especially with worms and phishing and drive-by downloads. The drive-by downloads, it's something that's being downloaded through your web browser. Port 80's always passed through, maybe port 443. At most, it's running an antivirus scan on this malware. Antivirus doesn't always work. Depends on how good these opportunistic hackers are. Phishing, that's a user going to a website. How do you stop that? And targeteers have detailed knowledge of topology and may be insiders. They may be on the inside already. And to an APT, a firewall is just a speed bump. Yeah, it's in the way a bit, but there are plenty of ways they can get around it. We do ourselves no favors by underestimating our attackers. The attackers have gotten really, really good, and we have to re-examine our defenses in light of technology changes, usage changes, and attacker changes. Yeah, the attackers seem to be winning. It's hard to name an important system that a good enough attacker has not been able to penetrate. And we have Stuxnet, which I'm sure its creators had not intended to be detected this soon, which somehow managed to leap across an air gap. A couple of years ago, I was called by a would-be screenwriter who wanted to do a movie about Stuxnet. And she wanted me to explain to her what it was. Okay, fine. And how did it get in the first place? I said, We know it was almost certainly installed by a USB flash drive, based on the nature of one of the holes it exploited. But how did it get there? This is where you have perfect freedom to use your imagination. Here's where it's James Bond breaking through a window, or James Bond seducing the beautiful blonde who's got access to the site, or anything you want. Use your imagination here. What we do know is that it worked. Somehow, an infected USB drive was installed into a sensitive machine on the other side of the air gap. But of course, the attackers are doing the same thing to machines that we do care about. You remember a few years ago when the US military banned use of flash drives? Why? According to published reports, some virus had gotten inside the US military systems across an air gap. And that was the logical culprit. So, I'm sorry?
You can just drop drives on campus.
Drop drives on campus, yeah. I heard one story about a penetration tester. He learned that his target corporation, that rumor had spread that there's going to be penetration testing, and everyone was on the lookout. So he scattered a few flash drives in the parking lot. And these flash drives were U3 flash drives, which look like CD-ROMs plus flash drives, and most versions of Windows up to that point would auto-run anything installed on the CD. So what do? We have to examine our policies, new and old, analytically. We have to take a look at the policy and ask ourselves, what are the hidden assumptions here? The technological assumptions are easier to identify. The behavioral ones, rather less so. But you have to stop and look at and say, what is the threat that this policy is intended to counter? What speed, mobility, usage pattern, what have you, is it designed to deal with? How do you analyze? Can an employee use their personal iPhone to connect to the corporate email system? How do you make that decision? And the answer is you have to go back and look at the policy that says no employee-owned equipment. Well, yeah, it's employee-owned, but you're losing some productivity. Or worse yet, you have people evading your security policies because they want to be productive. What are the assumptions behind that rule? And is it reasonable to relax that assumption? When you look at your security policies this way, document the assumptions. And once a year or so, go through the policies and say, is this assumption still true? Don't make it routine renewal of firewall hole request. I've seen this before. Corporations say, you want a hole through a firewall? Great. We won't leave this in place forever. Once a year, it must be renewed. That's much better than the alternative, which they install the hole, then there's a reorg, people leave, people quit, and no one knows why the hole is there anymore. But 5 years later, someone sees, well, I'm sure some organization still wants it to be there. So you have to leave it. Renew the request, but don't renew it blindly. You have to do it analytically. If you're running the security group, go through the initial analysis, talk with the people making the request, and see what they think of your analysis. What are the assumptions? Pay special attention to new trends. This is a great excuse to explain to your management why you have to go to conferences, because here's where you're going to learn about the new stuff. Most of these trends won't last. Security policies designed to deal with, say, MySpace and Friendster and Second Life are not tremendously interesting anymore because these are not major players anymore. Other things, iOS, Android, yeah, these seem to be keepers. These will be around for quite a while to come. Again, I don't know what's coming, but pay attention to it. Read the trade papers. See what it is that people actually need to get their jobs done, and understand what the implications are for your policy. It doesn't mean you say yes right away. It means it's got to be on your radar as a change. Our defenses are built for a given threat and a given set of technologies, Neither of these are static, so our defenses can't be either. We've got to be agile, and we've got to get away from checklists that are carved in stone and sometimes etched in silicon. Thank you. Questions? Use the mic since this is being recorded. There's a mic in the aisle there. Okay. Public, other questions? If not, great. Thank you for coming. Oh, you got a question. Okay.
Yeah, this is Rick, and Rick Farrow. When you said firewalls, the first thing I thought about was apt, because I have lots of friends who are, in the industry, and it seems today that firewalls have pretty much become almost irrelevant.
Yes.
And this is largely because, one, it's easy enough to find an email address. You phish them, you send them, an Adobe file of some sort or an Excel spreadsheet. Then you have a foothold on their machine, and once you have a foothold on their machine, then you start looking around the internal network, and then later on you figure out how you're going to exfiltrate the interesting things someone has found. And actually, when we're talking about APT, it's usually different groups. One group that does the phishing, another group that does the research, and yet another group that's going to put in the back doors, the real experts, and another group of experts to do the exfiltration. So it's really different groups of people. And of course, this is why it's APT, because it's a teamwork, and it's highly funded, and there's a lot of people doing it.
Stuxnet appears to have taken at least 20 people. And 4 different 0 days and several different platforms, including the SCADA system, which is not known to your garden variety hackers.
Right. In fact, it was equipment that was only used in a couple of places and manufactured in Germany. So.
The SCADA system was manufactured in Germany and targeted motor frequency controllers made either in Finland or Tehran. So whoever did it also had really good intelligence about their target. Add that to the number of people involved, too. It's another good spot for the screenwriter to use her imagination.
Right. Yeah. So to me, that seems as soon as we had HTTP, the game was over, because
Yes.
it was way too complicated to write an application gateway firewall for.
HTTP has been referred to as the universal solvent for firewalls. Firewalls are at best obsolescent. I came to that conclusion before we posted the second edition of the Firewalls book. Let me rephrase it. The standard corporate firewall is useful against the joy hackers, and they're out there, and it's not a bad thing to have. It's foolish to depend on them. I've written a lot more elsewhere, not yet published, on how to think about firewalls, but the short answer is that, I think I said this in '94, that a firewall can't protect a network larger than that controlled by a single system administrator. Because otherwise you don't really know what the needs and the protocols are.
Right.
And I call these point firewalls, departmental firewalls, and they're very good for protecting low-value resources that can't protect themselves. Take your typical network-connected printer. If somebody starts printing all black pages, they can run you out of paper and toner, and these are toners remarkably expensive.
More than gold.
Most of our printer protocols don't allow you to authenticate. Most of our users don't want to be bothered. They're printing a lot. But generally, you want to go print physically local to where you are, and departments and organizations tend to be geographically close, and often on their own land just for performance reasons. So, at the border to that land, you have a simple packet filter that says, thou must not access the printer port from off-land. It's a simple policy. It's effective against that threat model of someone trying to run you out of toner. And it's not getting in the way of most users. There's a class of protocols like that for which that class of firewall is a perfectly reasonable defense. As the defense for a corporation, no, I would not do that. There's, as you say, there are too many ways around it. But when you analyze what the firewall is doing against what threats and what topologies and so on, then the answer of this point firewall practically falls out. My laptop is going to be infected with something that's going to try to use up all the paper. I'm sorry, this is not real threat model. This is the joy hacker snapping off car antennas. I'm not going to worry about it. On the other hand, my department at Columbia has had problems with people from other departments on campus. Students get this weekly or monthly quota of a certain number of pages. It comes with their university tuition. The CS department had wide open printers, so we had people wandering in, connecting to the printers, and, let me go print in the CS department. Won't count against my quota. Perfectly rational optimization on their part. We resorted to authentication and a point firewall. Perfectly rational defense, perfectly adequate defense. Is it foolproof? No. Do I know how to get around it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can a clever enough student find their way around it? Yes. Unless word spreads too widely, we're not going to worry about it. It's not that bad a threat model. So.
Chris, you want to ask a question?
So, this wasn't my original question, but
Okay.
I was sitting in the courtyard near my office in Kendall Square, and I opened up my phone, and I noticed that my phone offered to connect me to 2 bars, a coffee house, my office, 2 other offices, and 3 HP printers. And so next time, I think I was thinking maybe I should print out pages that said, please turn my Wi-Fi off. But maybe I'll just start printing out black pages.
Yeah.
The reason I came up actually was it's 1994. The book comes out. It's now 2013. It took us 20 years to convince companies to pay for installing firewalls and handle the threats from 20 years ago. How are we going to convince them to pay for the mitigation of these threats? How are we going to convince them they're real? And you talked all about threats here. You didn't talk about the economic argument we somehow have to make to our management.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no. The economic argument is that a lot of these rules are getting in the way of productivity, and some of them, like the password rules, are getting in the way of security. Because when you forget your work password and it has to be reset, it's costing you time, and they may not be doing a good enough job of really validating your identity. So there are security threats, there are productivity threats. The best way to do it is for the auditors and possibly the insurance companies to understand that the current rules are not doing the job. My fear is that they'll add new rules on top of the meaningless old rules. I can't help that.
Right. I think just adding more rules is not the solution. You have to convince them. Here's the risk we're facing. Here's the downside cost.
It's a detailed economic argument. I'll throw in a gratuitous ad for this book that I'm writing, but the book's at least a year away because it's not even finished yet, and
so it'll be out of date by.
But it's just title may be the same as the title of this talk about thinking security, and I tried to go through the process of analyzing. I call it an advanced book on security. How do you analyze the cost benefit to doing X, Y, or Z? For example,
right.
How about wireless? What are the arguments for and against allowing an ordinary employee laptop to connect to a public Wi-Fi hotspot? What are the risks? Benefits pretty obvious, but what are the risks? How do you analyze that question? So that's one chapter.
Yeah.
That chapter's written, but no, it's not published yet. It's at least a year away.
Hi, so we talked a bit about GPUs and Moore's law, and the point is that power is still growing and performance are still growing. I don't know what was the general opinion about 10 years ago, whether people were convinced or not that 6 characters length password will be possible to be hacked today by brute force method. So I would like to know what probably by 2020 or 2030 we'll have petaflops at home, probably. So people might be able to brute force hack some passwords. What are we going to do at this time?
So there are a few possible answers to that. The best answer, of course, is to get out of the password game. And ultimately we have to, but we're not going to for websites. Running a consumer-facing website is a low margin per customer business. You cannot afford to spend too much on it. Everybody understands passwords. If you take a 15 or if you take a 20-character password, I do not think that will ever be brute forceable.
Yeah,
We'll
but
run out of
people
Moore's
won't
law.
take 20 lanes.
But you're not going to memorize it. But you can use. But your password manager can do that.
Yeah.
And their password managers are starting to catch on. The attackers will start going after them soon, I'm sure. But there are single sign-on solutions being promoted. Google is trying to push this anti-password alliance. Log into Google or Facebook or one of a handful of other sites and use your login to that site to connect to lots of other sites. The downside there is twofold. One, it's a single point of failure. If that password is compromised, and I have no reason to think that people will pick better password for Facebook or for Google than they do for a random website, then you're well and truly in trouble. The other downside from a lot of people's perspective, and especially from corporations' perspective, is privacy. If I log into a site with my Google login or my Facebook login, then Google or Facebook knows that I've been there. And these are companies that love to learn these things. That may be acceptable from a consumer perspective when it comes to consumer websites. It is probably not acceptable to most corporations to have their employees' habits tracked by so you will not see that for employee logins. We're starting to see a rapid growth in use of cell phone for SMS messages for challenge response. We're also starting to see the growth of malicious apps and malware for cell phones designed to mimic this. And of course, your cell phone number doesn't change very often, so it's an even bigger privacy risk. So there are different drivers here.
Okay.
But for the moment, I do not think passwords are going away anytime soon. I do think that password managers are the currently feasible solution. A better kind of password manager would be a special USB widget that talked to the browser, looked at the website, and only sent over the password for that website and wasn't easily hackable because it's a separate outboard device. It's an interesting design. We can do this cryptographically more or less today, but standardization's not quite there, and hence the economics aren't quite there. But that, I think, is the way we will be going.
Okay, thank you.
A convenient hardware token. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've hinted at several times, including in that last comment, about one of the issues, which is how to make these procedures not be too onerous for users so that they will actually use them. I think that's something that needs to be upfront and explicit.
Absolutely.
And I think
Usability.
if I may, that I think that's one of the shortcomings of this talk is that you didn't hit that one directly on the head. You hinted at it, and it's in there, but you didn't say so in so many words.
Usability, yeah. This talk was about the assumptions. I did not phrase usability as an assumption. Arguably, I should have. That's a good point. But I agree completely. Usability is absolutely crucial. In the last 5-8 years, it's become recognized as crucial in the security community. You see more and more papers on it. There's a conference or two on it. There's SOUPs next month, Symposium on Usable Privacy and Security. Graduated PhD student who focused on usable privacy mechanisms. Absolutely a crucial topic. It's one of the reasons why I have a cartoon that I use in one of my lectures of advertising a nose hair reader that you use to authenticate yourself, and I talk about a biometric lip print reader. Every morning you must kiss your computer screen to log in. Yeah, that would not be acceptable psychologically. Though attitudes change. 20 years ago you heard the same about fingerprint readers. People wouldn't accept them. Now they're moderately common. So attitudes can change. Though I don't think we'll ever see people kissing their screens. Most people would rather punch them and get a knuckle print rather than a lip print. Yeah.
Is really security a losing battle? Because the expectation is criminals don't play by the rules. So as many rules like we can set in place, then they always go around it somehow.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I think that our current approaches to security are not going to succeed, but that's a different talk. That's the talk I gave this morning over at Wise, a few blocks from here. If you can find it on my website called Cybersecurity Challenges. And I think that the current approach to system security is not going to succeed. You know, the old definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. But that's a very different topic, and different. But when you say the bad guys aren't playing by the rules, that's absolutely correct. But this is why you've got to go base your policies on technology and economics rather than current trends, rather than what you think the bad guys will do. You're right, bad guys don't play by the rules.
So is your best defense is to be like appear as a low value target ultimately? Like is it because of the structure, you're a big company, you're a big target, and
Low value helps, but low value is still useful for sending spam. I would say more. A comment I heard once, I can't give the context, but let's try to base our defenses on the laws of physics. When I say that a 20-character random password's not going to be brute forceable, I can make a very good case that the physics of computation will never permit it. Just the combinatoric explosion and the number of cycles that it would take starts exceeding the number of atoms in the crust of the Earth when you get to a certain point. If 20 characters, that's 160 bits. That's beyond the point that I think will ever be brute forceable, if they're really random. Even some it's 140. I'm sorry?
That's not the point. That's when you root the guy's machine that you don't need to get.
That's why we need to move away from passwords. But again,
But even if
passwords,
you certificate, it doesn't help. If you root the computer, you have a certificate.
the pass, the,
If you have to use the token,
whoever said that the certificate had to be on the computer?
well, you said you have a hardware token.
Yes.
The hardware token is in the computer, and you hack the guy's computer, and you have
It-
access to all that stuff.
Right. Okay, so exercise. How would you design your hardware token to be resistant, not proof, but resistant to that attack?
You can.
You can go up to a certain point. You can, for example, require the user to press a physical button in order to do the authentication. Then the authentication will only happen when the user wants to, and you've seriously limited the rate of attack. And if the login doesn't go through, the user knows something has gone wrong. You can have a display on that. Displays and buttons are reasonably cheap. Put a little bit of context on that display. It is not perfect. There are still attacks. But the goal is not perfection. The goal is to be good enough. And if you are trying to run a computer for the NSA that you think the Chinese are after, then you want to do that plus an air gap plus a lot more. And if you think that the goal is to go deal with the guy who's telling you about, listen, I got an email today telling me about my email was selected for an inheritance. I mean, that one is below even the threshold of, my father used to be president of Nigeria that I was getting 10 years ago.
Well, he died, and that's where the inheritance.
Yeah, well, okay.
Another,
So one of the, security is a matter of economics. You're trying to say, can I raise the attacker's cost of, there's the old joke about you can't outrun a bear. No, we just have to be faster than the other guy. And if you're not being targeted, you just have to outrun the other guy. If you are being targeted, you've got to outrun the bear. And that's a problem. But again, what resources does the attacker have? I was talking with a friend of mine who has, let's just say he has somewhat spooky connections. And I showed him a paper on a paper designed for a cryptanalytic device to factor 1024-bit RSA keys. And it was going to take about a year and cost $1 million. And he laughed and said, the political problems that would cause over whose key, RSA key, you most wanted to factor, and it was going to take 1 year, it would never get built or never get used because the different organizations would be arguing too much about whose target was the most valuable. Even in that realm, the cost per attack was too high. What is the cost for the attacker? I'll tell another story that I heard once, and this was said in the open. The U.S. military has 30 and 40-year-old crypto gear in place right now. 40 years ago takes us to pre-DES. Why is this still in use? Custom environment, and not very many of them, comparatively low-value target for the Russians, the Chinese, the whomevers. Does the NSA know it needs to be replaced? Absolutely. But they don't have an unlimited budget for replacing these things. It's not the crypto algorithm. It's the hardware to talk to this weird device. It's the procedures, it's the keying material, it's the software to talk to it. And there aren't a whole lot of these, and you're going to retire that weapon system in another 5 years anyway. What is the cost? Security is a matter of economics for the attacker and the defender. How can you get good enough to make the bear say, I'm not going to be able to do it, I'm going to starve to death before I get it?
Another definition of insanity is using the same piece of software over and over again and expecting it to behave correctly. We've been focusing a lot on threats of the stealing password and breaking encryption sort, but it seems to me the greater threat, and the one that I think we truly have no real idea how to escape, is the vulnerabilities that come because of crappy code and crappy coders.
I'm really going to have to give that morning talk again right now. You guys have another 75 minutes?
Fine with me.
Yes. About 15 years ago, I analyzed every cert advisory issued to that point and found that 85% of them described vulnerabilities that you could not fix with crypto. It was buggy code or misadministration or both.
What's the name of your morning talk?
Cybersecurity challenges. You can find it on my webpage, the slides on my webpage.
Thank you.
And that talk, the slides are not in the public domain, but they are Creative Commons licensed, so feel free.
You can read it.
You can read them, absolutely. You can post them on your webpage too. Just leave my name on them. The buggy code is the really bad problem. It's one of the reasons why I think we're not going to ultimately succeed in software. If you read spy fact or fiction, you may have heard of the phrase Moscow rules. The rules that U.S. agents operate under when in Moscow or places of similar threat model. And one rule is assume that everything is compromised. One design principle for the future is your system, any component will be compromised, now what? We've got to design systems that are resilient in the face of compromise. Today's systems are brittle. One hole and all the data on them is exposed. I want a design where only a little bit of the data is exposed per unit time, and you can detect this and recover from it before too much of the data is lost. How long can that be? Context dependent. How rapidly can you detect it? How good's your intrusion detection system? How do you do it? Very situation dependent. Do I know how to build systems like this? Only for toy cases right now. It's my research approach. That's what that talk was about. But software security, software correctness is the problem. And this is something that Ches and I said in 1994. The purpose of the firewall is to protect buggy hosts from the internet.
Yes.
And I said that in so many words in 1994. It's not quite those words in the book. It isn't slides from May 94 on my website. Yeah.
So I was wondering why you were giving this talk about. The other day I read an article about, I think it was about Firefox and Chrome, basically not updated. They were, the point was about HTTPS, I think, and certificates. And the idea was that we have all this infrastructure to ensure that, the websites are actually run by the people they claim they are and all that. But then it turns out that Firefox actually updates your database of trustable sources once every month or, every half a year.
It's worse than that. Microsoft, if you delete a certificate, will helpfully reinstall it for you.
So I was wondering if, where does this come from? Where are we wrong? Is it buggy code that updates it every 6 months, or is it an assumption made by someone?
That's an assumption. That comes down to assumptions. I have another talk on that I can give right now too. The certificate system that we use on the internet is the direct descendant with one crucial change of a structure that was devised call it 25 years ago, 30 years ago, for an environment where there was one root certificate and everybody had one true identity obtained ultimately from one root. This was an assumption that never made sense. I tried telling people this several decades ago, but some people wouldn't listen. Well, by the time they deployed the public key infrastructure for the web, it was very obvious there could not be one root authority for every corporation on the web. So when SSL was designed, they made a crucial design mistake. They said, instead of making it a tree, we're going to make it a forest, a collection of trees. And any one root can issue a certificate to anybody at all. It's great for competition. I work for the FTC right now. The FTC loves competition. It's awful for security because it means when a DigiNotar gets hacked apparently by the Iranians, they can issue Google certificates even though Google doesn't want them to issue Google certificates. And we don't quite know what to do about it. There are a few proposals on the table. It has been recognized as a serious problem. There was a workshop at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, 2 months ago. What do we do about this? There are two major proposals on the table, one called certificate transparency. Google is pushing it. The other is called DANE. It's been standardized by the IETF. And DANE says, let's use DNSSEC, if anybody knows how to use that, most don't, and put the certificates or pointers to the certificates in the DNS. It turns out there's two solutions are complementary. You can use them both. That's probably going to be the way we go because both of them have serious weaknesses. But the assumption was made that all of these hundreds of roots, and by my actual count, Windows has about 300 of them, 10% of which, by the way, are overtly agencies of one government or another around the world, and I don't know how many are covertly controlled by one government around the world or another, or how many have been hacked. That the assumption was made that every one of these CAs was going to be honest and competent. And both of these assumptions have been proven false. So what do you do?
So the other question I had while you were giving this talk is, so we're speaking about assumptions and all this, but then I wonder if, the internet has become such an integral part of our lives, isn't it? I mean, and we in some way we want it to be free and open and all that, but somehow these problems come from the fact that it's so open. And so for me, it's a kind of a paradox where if you could access the internet only using your whatever, let's say your DNS, your actual, DNA would be linked to everything that you do on the internet, it would be much harder to someone to steal your whatever Facebook password. But then you would, so it's a question of how much freedom you allow for people and how much safety you get in extent. Or is that?
Given that I think that the real problem is buggy software, and nobody can produce bug-free software, I don't think that more controls are going to solve the problem. There are a few problems that can solve. If we could decree that there can only be one certificate authority in the world, we'd get rid of some of that, but it doesn't solve the honesty and competence problem for that one CA, especially because they tend to go delegate things to sub-CAs for various very legitimate business and scaling reasons. Decreeing that we all had to run the one true operating system is not going to solve it because that one true operating system is buggy. I don't care what it is, it's buggy. So I don't think that, fortunately, I don't think that cracking down on the openness is going to solve the problem. It's not stopping some people from trying. I see more and more calls, we can solve all of our security problems on the internet if only we had stronger authentication. Well, great, but stronger authentication doesn't do any good if my machine is hacked and someone is using my credentials to go do the nefarious things, including when I push the button on this outboard USB token.
So what do you do against users with competence? Because with SSL is fine, but everybody will add the certificate, the malicious certificate, if they want to decide.
There are a couple of papers at CCS last November on how mobile apps deal with SSL, and they do it appallingly badly. Very few do certificates correctly, even as well as web browsers. A few do. The Twitter app does it very well. It pins the certificate. It knows this is the certificate for Twitter and will not accept any other, no matter who issued it, even the proper CA. Chrome does this for a very small handful of websites. Last I looked, about 100. You know how many web servers there are on the internet? A lot. About 100 are pinned. And if you want to see how bad a solution pinning is, generically, run Cert Patrol and the Cert Patrol extension to Firefox and see how many times you're annoyed with certificates changing for whatever reason. It is not something I would recommend to normal, rational people. I run it, but I've never claimed to be normal or rational. It's not a scalable thing. It's not a scalable solution. But these apps weren't even checking the domain name in the certificate they connected to. Oh, they weren't checking the CA. Oh, I have an SSL connection. Cool. I must be talking to the right party. Makes it easy to analyze the protocols, I suppose, but there are two papers in CCS. You can go look them up. One, I forget where. One came out of Germany. I forget where the other one was from. One of the authors was Texas Austin. I think another was at Stanford. So it's a problem. Doing crypto wrong is that comes to the heading of buggy code. Lots of ways to make mistakes. I think there are more ways to make mistakes than to do it correctly. In fact, I know that. Yeah, we've got to build systems that can deal with the inevitability of failures. Look, we don't expect perfect security in the physical world. There is always going to be an irreducible minimum of risk and danger. And the question is, can we get it low enough that it's acceptable? Right now on the internet, we can't, given how essential part of our life it is. I do not think that the risk level is acceptable. The question is what to do about it. And there are not going to be any quick fixes to this. Even if I were to wave my magic wand tonight, well, I don't have a big enough magic wand to fix all the buggy code in the world. But even if I have a big enough magic wand to say, this is the one true architecture to use, do you know how many years it will take before the installed base gets converted to that one true architecture? Can't possibly be done in less than 10. Not even conceivable. 20, maybe. We have to get through the next 20 years. Maybe, I said. Maybe. You know, if I could promise that my one true architecture would be reduced development cost, then it might get through sooner. It won't be. I'm sorry?
It'd be faster.
And be faster. Although CPU time asymptotically is free. I'm not going to worry about that. I worry more about people time.
Would it happen before or after everyone transitions to IPv6?
Before or after IPv6? IPv6, I am actually more than cautiously optimistic. I'm seeing enough motion towards it. I was actually looking at the header of a moderately suspicious piece of email the other day, and I discovered it traversed one IPv6 link. Admittedly, that seemed to be a local link on that particular machine, but we're starting to see it. All major operating systems support it out of the box today. Cisco is pushing it. There's promoting tweets about why IPv6 is important. Some of the consumer ISPs are supporting it. A lot of the big websites, Google, Facebook, and a few others, are supporting it. It's starting to become very real, and when it happens, it's going to start happening correctly out of the box, and people are not going to notice. They can see a weird string of letters and digits and colons instead of the dotted quads we see today, and they won't know what either means, but it doesn't matter. It will happen, not as quickly as I would like, but it is happening. I have IPv6 to my house through a tunnel to a friend, but my ISP is rolling it out for its residential and business customers. Doing it slowly, but they're rolling it out, and I'm hoping its competitors follow.
Well, my ISP already has had beta status IPv6 for some time.
Huh?
I don't see any movement at all at the university here.
They'll move, but you are starting to see more movement because some of the really big players understand the threat and to their business. the consumer ISP, we're out of IP addresses. And you've either got to have what's called carrier-grade NAT, a difficult technology for, even if you're having carrier-grade NAT, the chunks being natted by the carriers are so big they don't have enough IP addresses to address their infrastructure or to hand out to the consumers on the RFC 1918 addresses. So we're seeing it. Again, not as quickly as I'd like, but we are seeing it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sort of rhetorical.
No, use the mic. Use the mic.
So, just in some way it's rhetoric, but I'm wondering what's wrong with software people in general. I mean, us. That we look at this problem and then obviously we go like, okay, so there has to be a solution to it. While people who let's say maintain America's borders, they know really well that actually they cannot stop people coming into the country if they want to come in. And why is that software people, we believe that actually we could, secure a laptop against any kind of threat and it would just work. And the internet is the solution to everything. So I'm not sure there's an answer to it. Or
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I don't. I do not. I am completely mystified by that question. Do we see? Okay. This is a version of that other talk I was talking about. It's not the one I gave today, but it's a close enough version. So you can go copy it down. It is on my webpage. We're doing our security education in the wrong place. The people who learn about security are the security professionals, but the bugs are committed by the application developers. And they don't know security because it's never taught. And they're building the software as quickly as they can to get it out the door as quickly as they can, because if they don't ship quickly, their lunch is going to be eaten by their competitors who have the same great new idea. So it's ship first, test later. This is the way of Silicon Valley in the internet age. So we have a lot of code that's been developed by people who don't know how to avoid the simple mistakes. The big companies understand this. The big companies do a good job. They do a very good job. Google and Microsoft and Apple and Facebook and a handful of others do a really good job. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. Every one of those companies has had some embarrassing failures in recent years. Facebook, just the other day, announced that 6 million email addresses and other private information were exposed under certain circumstances. They're not perfect, but they do a better job. I worry more about the small companies and the older stuff, the stuff that hasn't been developed under modern conditions. Microsoft got security, they got religion about security 10 years ago. They've spent a huge $250 million on process and education and training and so on. And still, once a month, there are Patch Tuesday, there are critical vulnerabilities. I do not believe that all of these are an old code that hasn't been looked at in 10 years. Too much of the code has been thoroughly rewritten. This is software. If you haven't read Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, read it. Memorize it. Some of it's dated. Dates to 1974, the first edition. And reading that the user manual should be stored on microfilm, well, that's a little bit, microfiche, sound a little bit odd. He issued a 20th anniversary edition, at this point almost 20 years ago, 1994. We kept the original text intact, but added 4 new chapters. One of which was a wonderful essay called No Silver Bullet. He wrote this around 84, where he said, in the next decade, there will not be an order of magnitude improvement in the price and correctness product of software development. And he was bitterly attacked by people who were convinced that they had the panacea to the software development problem. So for this second edition of Mythical Man Month, he not only included No Silver Bullet, he included another essay looking back at No Silver Bullet to say, was I right or were they right? I wonder if he's going to reprise that next year. I should drop him a note and find out. But if you haven't read that book, you should. It explains exactly why developing software is hard. And yeah, he presents what looked to him like the panacea. But I use the manuscript for that book as my textbook when I took software engineering from Brooks in 1973. A lot has changed, but many panaceas have come and gone. Object-oriented programming seems to be sticking around a bit longer than most, and it's a good technique when used properly. As part of a regular program of good software hygiene and regular professional care. It's not a panacea. It's a tool. Tools are not panaceas. There's a study done by Carl Landwehr and some colleagues of his at the Naval Research Lab, 1993. They examined 100 security bugs, security holes, and found that a quarter of them were due to bugs in the specifications. It wasn't even the code. The specs were wrong. The programmers had faithfully implemented the wrong design. It's turtles all the way down, or all the way up. And you can get problems in any layer, but developing software is really, really hard. Which is why I think we need to think about it differently architecturally. But again, that's this talk. So,
Well, thank you, Steve.
quite welcome. Okay, guys, much longer.